Wherever you are, welcome to the final part of a series on the perceived threats from China. Previously, we've talked about human rights, Hong Kong issues, and the military build-up or expansion. This time we're looking at the imminent invasion of Taiwan, or more correctly, the lack of it. In case you missed the introduction to this series, there are four major threats from China. All are perceived rather than real. All are amplified from misunderstandings or misinterpretations, and all can be explained in a different way. But no one appears to have given anyone the opportunity to do that. Government, diplomatic circles, or the political arena. They're not getting a sense of balance. We've never considered that the other side of the debate, the one that says, this might be wrong, we've never considered it. We accept the threats must be real, but they're not. Not when viewed through a different lens. The threats become much more benign. When viewed with a different cultural appreciation, the threats become much less intimidating. And when viewed with the correct interpretation, there are no threats. They're gone. Unfortunately, when amplified by Anglosphere media, which they usually are, these threats appear increasingly more aggressive and very intimidating. The four major threats from the Western world, or the Western world perceives from China, are the human rights abuses in Xinjiang, maybe Tibet too, the removal of democratic rights in Hong Kong, an aggressive military build-up, and the imminent invasion of Taiwan. There's an alternative for all of them. Let's take a closer look at what China's likely to do about Taiwan. The most interesting thing about China's Navy build-up, the PLAN, is that according to the Pentagon, it's built the wrong ships for a land invasion. The Pentagon reports that the correct landing craft could be adapted from current vessels, or new ships might need to be built in the future. This is pure speculation, based on their own interpretations of what they would do and what they think China needs to do in order for China to be like them. The US Naval Institute, USNI, wrote a report in 2019 explaining but misinterpreting the main point about why China isn't going to invade Taiwan anytime soon. They can't. As this report and the Pentagon have noted, they don't have the right ships. Many so-called experts lambast China for this lack of strategic thinking, stating they have built the wrong ships for their strategy. But it isn't China's strategy. It's America's perception of China's strategy. The People's Republic of China has never said it will invade Taiwan or it will take Taiwan over by force. It has only ever said it will prevent Taiwan from being taken. And there's a very clear and noticeable difference. The experts, however, constantly present information that this invasion is imminent. The 2019 report found that, quote, China continues to deploy tactics designed to fall short of armed conflicts and accomplish its objects and goals along its periphery in a so-called grey zone approach, unquote. But the report makes one fundamental error. Its objects and goals, its goals, meaning China's goals, do not and never have included an invasion of Taiwan. It's the so-called experts who keep suggesting that Taiwan is the target. Once again, the world's most aggressive nation, which suggests that China is poised to invade, because there's no doubt under the same set of circumstances, this is what they would do. That's not a threat from China. That's the perception of a threat from a country that deals in threats. In fairness to the USNI report, and in a rarely seen balance in a US document, it does clearly state China's intentions through a quote from a Ministry of Defense spokesman. And I'll quote, word for word, China will always be a builder of a world peace, a contributor of world development, and a protector of international order. We hope that some US officials can see China and the PLA rationally and objectively, focus on the implementation of the consensuses reached between the two heads of state to develop bilateral and military-to-military relationships, and on maintaining global and regional peace and stability. This is what a responsible and faithful big country should do. End of quote. The reason people won't listen to China when they say this is because the world's most aggressive media and the world's most aggressive nation is telling us a different story. A nation that has put military boots on the ground in almost every country in the world, including the very island they suggest China wants to put the military in, and one that has been at war for almost its entire history, is telling the world that China, with no history of war, no history of expansion, no record of aggression, is expanding and being aggressive. And the Western, mostly English-speaking world believes them. China will defend Taiwan. It has very clearly demonstrated it can effectively blockade the island. And when it did so, after the ill-advised Pelosi visit, the US did the only sensible thing, and they monitored from a distance. China has demonstrated what it can do. In a sense, it demonstrated through that action what it intends to do, only if it's required to do so by the actions of outside forces. But it's never spoken of a desire or an intention to invade the island. Every Chinese media report related to Taiwan supports the fact that the Chinese people do not want an invasion of the island, and not one Western media report suggesting aggression can ever truthfully report that a Chinese official has said this. They can only say that China won't rule it out, and that's very much different to saying that they will rule it in. General Mark Milley last year predicted this imaginary invasion could come as early as the end of 2023. And a financial analyst by the name of Kyle Bass, who lost a fortune betting on the failure of the Hong Kong dollar and was named in an illegal fundraising operation that settled with the SEC, also predicted last year that it would happen before 2024. Where do Western media recruit these experts? Clearly, they hadn't read the Chinese government's white paper on the Taiwan issue. That was issued a couple of months before both of them said their comments. China's white paper does talk of reunification, but it has no mention whatsoever of a forced reunification of Taiwan. What it does say, and is unequivocal in this, no one will be allowed to separate any part of Chinese territory from China. To be specific, at its 19th National Congress in October 2017, the CPC affirmed the basic policy of upholding one country, two systems, and promoting national reunification, and it emphasized its resolve never to allow any person, any organization, or any political party at any time or in any form to separate any part of Chinese territory from China. It's hard to be more specific than this, but for more evidence of China's intention, the word peaceful is mentioned 54 times in that paper. Before making predictions on what China might do, it would be worthwhile for the experts, the ones who analyze China's intentions, to spend a little time reading what China historically has said it will do. Compare that with what actually happened, what it did do, and then apply a similar approach to what China says it will do in the future. By doing this, we see a pattern: peaceful growth, friendly trade relations through the BRI with more than 70% of the world that is moving out of the shadow of Western's coercive influence. If we were to do the same for the USA, we'd find a different story. We'd find human rights abuses. They accuse others of these things, but there's a catalogue of broken promises to people and countries who supported them. There's a litany of left-behind supporters in places like Hong Kong and Afghanistan. There's a register of funds used to sponsor terror attacks and support people who become terrorists just because they're enemies of the USA's enemies. We'd also find serial exploitation, starting with African slaves and continuing through to modern-day child and forced labor, people trafficking, and systemic and government-approved drug dealing through an opium war, as well as a history of unwarranted invasions based on unfounded accusations. With this information in mind, All the optimists, like myself, need to rally hard to overcome this funding and this misinformation that US money puts out there. Because these four threats need to be considered for what they are. They're perceptions formed from misinformation. They are projections of what the USA has already been proven to have done. And they are most certainly what the US would do if they were in the same shoes as China. Just imagine a world where Russian or Chinese military bases surrounded Alaska, where the Caribbean and Mexico were laced with rocket bases and airstrips and military establishments housing hostile, battle-hardened forces. Imagine if there was a US state, for example, Hawaii, Texas, California, or Alaska, where independence-seeking organizations already exist, although none of them are or have ever been funded by China. Let's imagine if China did start to fund them. The USA would do what it's always done. It would attack, and it would do so aggressively. This is why they think China will do the same. But China is not the USA. That's not what Sun Tzu would recommend in The Art of War. It's not what Confucius would advise, as he would only espouse a war that brings peace to the people, which an invasion of Taiwan most certainly would not. Nor is it what the 1.4 billion people who live in China want. And so because it's not what they want, it's not what the CPC will do. And that is the lens through which China needs to be viewed. China is not your enemy. The people telling you China is your enemy are your greatest threat. And thanks very much for sticking with me throughout this series. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.